six-word memoir about my mother is, mine won't be like everybody else's, which is something that I heard my mother say many, many times over many, many years about many, many things. When I tell people that I was raised by a mother who was an extreme snob, they tend to think that I was raised by a mother who was either very rich or worse, a social climber, but my mother was emphatically neither. She was somebody who had sort of an insistence, even a mania for originality. She had an aversion to anything that could resemble normality. And she didn't ally herself with the upper crust. She didn't ally herself with the bourgeoisie. She didn't ally herself with bohemians. If she was on some subject momentarily of the same opinion or taste, it was an accident. It was like she jumped off of the tacky cruise ship of mainstream culture and just landed on a raft with some people briefly. And being raised in her house was a little like living as fallen gentry. You know, we didn't have a lot of money for fine things, but we glutted ourselves on disdain of the mainstream. She sometimes, because of my mother's mania to be not normal, not typical, would invent extraordinarily lovely things. For example, at a certain point, she turned against bedding. I mean, anything that you or I would recognize as bedding in the Western world was banished from her house. And to go into a bed in my mother's house is kind of amazing. You're going to be materials that you never expected to sleep with. And every duvet cover in the house was banished. There was nothing left. And every bed in my mother's house is covered with uncovered duvets, piles of uncovered duvets. And when you sleep, you know, one duvet will slip off and there'll be another duvet to grab on top of you. And it's amazing. I mean, it's like sleeping like a fairy in thistledown. And at other times, her resistance to the normal is gratuitous, possibly even ridiculous. I remember one Christmas, she came in with a turkey that she had covered with a bright pink Malaysian spice. And I said, "Mom, why is our Christmas turkey fuchsia?" And she said, "I don't want my turkey to be like everyone else's." And I think that my mother's, personality, I'm most indebted to her professionally, because as a bookseller, my job is to choose amazing books to bring into my bookstore, but perhaps even more important job is to keep all the shitty books out. And for every book that I let in, I am standing at the gate, pitchfork in hand, keeping out hundreds more. And most people would, for example, I see probably every year 150 to 200 diet books, eat this and you'll be happier, your sex drive will go up, you'll lose weight, etc. Most people would look at these books and see uniformly craven, rapacious garbage. But since I have been trained, since I was a babe in arms, to recognize the unoriginal, the derivative, the tacky, no matter what category I confront, I can see when something actually has the spark of creativity, the spark of authenticity, the spark of life, even in a belly fat book. So, my mother. Yeah, I see now as an adult, I see it quite clearly that my mother's snobbery is simply an attempt to outrun her childhood, which was miserable. I mean, that's another story, but her childhood sucked. And I think at some point she conflated, the emotional with the cultural. She came from a very, very small town in Canada that no one here, I'm sure, has ever heard of. And, no Canadian has even ever heard of it. And her parents were people whose, aspirations and tastes were not demonstrably different from their neighbors. And she left that home quite young. She skipped grades. She left when she was 16 and went to university. And I don't know if she was already a snob at 16 when she left her parents' house. I don't know if she was a snob in university, and I don't know if she was a snob when she started her working life, but by the time she was 25 and I came around, I have it on evidence, she was already a total snob. When I had my own son 7 years ago, and I opened my mouth to sing lullabies to the baby in my arms, The most horrible songs came out. The songs that I remembered from my childhood were gruesome, totally inappropriate. I mean, the songs that she sang, my mom loved to sing. I mean, she's very, very sorry. She thinks that really her calling was as a singer-songwriter. So she sang us to sleep every night. She'd sit in the hallway and sing and sing. And the songs that she would sing were like Tom Dooley, I met her on the mountain, there I took her life, met her on the mountain and stabbed her with my knife. Or there was one that my mother hates country music, even the sound of it, but there was one country music ballad that she sang all the time that went, that's what you get for loving me, that's what you get for loving me, everything you have is gone. As you can see, that's what you get for loving me. And then the nightly, her favorite lullaby, the nightly one, went like this. It went, sometimes I feel like a motherless child, etc. And I called her after I started to remember songs of my child, and I said, Mom, what were you thinking singing these songs to children? And she said, oh, I never wanted my kids to be like everybody else's. So, I've always known we all know my mom's a snob. It's obvious, but one thing I had never really interrogated was my own snobbery. How much I had inherited this or learned this from my mother. And I think living in sort of bougie New York was maybe excellent camouflage for that. But when my son became a little bit after he turned 6 years old, he started calling attention to the fact that I could be a more open-minded, kind, open-spirited, generous person. He would say things to me like, Mom, just because someone talks with gum in their mouth doesn't mean they don't have anything interesting to say, etc., etc. And more broadly, he would say things often to me like, Mom, why can't you just accept what we're all stuck with? Which I think really could lead to a very good working definition of snobbery. Somebody who's always trying to separate themselves from the reality that as human beings we are all bloody stuck with. Someone always trying to set themselves apart. And so I started, in the last year, this sort of journey of recognizing my own snobbery, which leads me to the last part of my story, which is my mother's hell and me as an acting protagonist in this hell. So at the end of the long, long, hard winter, which we all just had in New York, I decided to take my beautiful son away somewhere warm. And we were looking on the internet at hotels in Mexico. We were looking at cool, chic, kind of eco hotels in Tulum and like groovy little boutique hotels in Oaxaca. And then my son saw a picture of a water slide. And he said, oh, Mom, click on that. And I clicked on that, and we were met with 100 pictures from an all-inclusive resort in Tulum. And my son said, and I quote, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I think I'm gonna faint. Long story short, we went to this resort. I dreaded telling my mother I was going. I just knew she was gonna hoot and holler, and she did, the whole thing. The idea of a 10-day trip for her with absolutely not a single moment of originality in it is, unbearable. And we went, and it was, I'm not gonna lie, the first 4, 5, maybe 6 days were very, very hard for me. I sent my mother a text, and I said, Mom, I'm really not gonna be able to enjoy this vacation if I can't rid myself of your snobbery. And she said, Sarah, don't get rid of your snobbery, wear it like armor. And so I got there, and there was a buffet, an enormous buffet. I actually did the math, and the buffet at the hotel where my son and I stayed in March could have comfortably fed a Roman legion. And I had really no experience with buffets. My mother obviously hated them. And I went to one when I was a child once, and it was so exciting, and I was getting the food, and my mother was sitting in this buffet, amidst all the noise and everything, and she was sitting there, still as a sphinx, not eating, watching me, and then she said, those mashed potatoes look like spit, which, by the way, is also 6 words, like spit. Anyway, so we got to this buffet, and I had a lot to get over. I realized that I had a profound, real deep aversive snobbery to people looking lingeringly at food, and especially lingeringly with greed at food. And you can't actually navigate a buffet without really looking at the food. You can't get the food from the tray to your plate without looking at it. You can't get the plate from the buffet to your table without looking at it. But then, I was with my darling son, and he was really looking lingeringly at the food, and it sort of helped. And then there were pools everywhere that were, when I arrived, I thought it was so strange. The pools, none of them had deep ends, and I thought that makes no sense. And then I realized it was because what people do in this sort of hotel is they walk around pools all day. They just walk around and they talk and they lean on the edges and they drink. They drink drinks that I had never tasted, like pina coladas and daiquiris, and they talk. And this was really not my world, and I was very uncomfortable, but my son loved it. He kept saying things to me like, "Mom, do you think this might actually be the best hotel in the world?" I'd say, "Maybe, sweetie, maybe. Maybe it is." And over the days, I started to thaw, and as I started to thaw, I started to talk to people, and it was a strange, strange coincidence that this hotel was at least 85 to 90% filled with small-town Canadians. I mean, not small city Canadians, not like Halifax or Edmonton. I mean, towns that nobody had heard of. And I was in this hotel, and it was really like going to the vacation spot of my mother's childhood, the very culture that she had spent her entire life trying to outrun. And I relaxed. I'd never been on a vacation before that involved no anxiety. There was no anxiety. There was no anything. I mean, there was just the buffet and the pool. And I started talking to people, and I had amazing conversations in which I didn't for one moment try to be interesting, which I had never before done, but every time I went and started to try to be interesting, I felt like a pretentious poser, and it was amazing. I mean, I would just sit with these, my new fleeting friends, and we'd really interrogate the quotidian together, like, do you put mustard in your egg salad? What do you really think about flip-flops? It was fabulous. And I really thought when I was there about my son, when my son was born, his godfather sent me a picture from India, which was a sculpture. And at the base of the sculpture was a placard that read, "The child gives birth to the mother," which I think is profoundly true in many ways. And one of the ways in which is true is that having a child gives birth to a mother's heart, which is enormous. I mean, I feel like I could fit my stingy pre-mother heart in like the bathroom linen closet of my new mother heart. And that was something he gave birth to in me. And on this trip, my son really opened my eyes, and I was really feeling more broad-minded, like I'd grown as a person. And I really was feeling very indebted to him for that. And then this is the funny part and the end of my story. I turned to my son with my heart open, large, and glowing, and I said, "Son, there's a boy about your age. Would you like to go play with him?" And my son said, "Oh, Mom, I don't want to play with him. I can tell he watches too much TV." And I said, "How can you tell?" And he said, "He's holding two rockets and banging them against each other and saying bang, bang, bang again and again." And I looked at the boy, and I looked at my son, my mother's grandson, and I realized he was right. Thank you.